On December 9th, 1965, something fell out of the sky and crashed in the woods of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. The military quarantined the town and then told the world it was just a meteor. But that's not what the eyewitnesses saw. Welcome to The Purple Files. If you enjoy our videos, please consider subscribing to the channel. Let's get right into it. It is one of the most compelling and deeply frustrating mysteries in American history. A story that begins with a brilliant streak of light seen by thousands across 6 states and a Canadian province, and ends with a sealed-off town, a military cordon, and decades of unanswered questions. This isn't just another blurry photo of a light in the sky. This is the story of a physical object that fell from the heavens and was allegedly recovered by the United States government. The official explanation was simple, clean, and immediate: a meteor. A random, brilliant act of nature that burned up in the atmosphere and left nothing behind but a spectacular light show. But the people of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, the men and women who were there on the ground that cold December evening, tell a very different story. They speak of a controlled descent, not a random fall. They describe a search, not for scattered fragments, but for a single, solid object. And they remember a military presence so swift and so absolute that it felt less like a scientific investigation and more like a top-secret recovery operation. For over 50 years, witnesses have insisted that what the military pulled out of those woods was not a rock from space. It was something else. In this video, we will separate fact from fiction. We will examine the declassified documents, hear the first-hand testimony of the people who were there, and explore the decades-long battle for the truth that led all the way to a federal lawsuit against NAC. What really crashed in Kecksburg on December 9th, 1965? Our story begins on December 9, 1965, at approximately 4:44 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As the winter sun began its descent, the sky over a vast portion of North America suddenly ignited. A brilliant, fiery object, described by countless observers as being far brighter than the full moon, blazed a trail across the heavens. This was no fleeting shooting star that vanishes in an instant. It was a prolonged, spectacular event witnessed by thousands of astonished people across at least 6 American states, from Michigan and Illinois to Ohio and Pennsylvania, and was even clearly seen as far north as Ontario, Canada. The sheer scale of the event sent shockwaves through official channels. The Federal Aviation Administration was inundated with 23 separate and urgent reports from commercial airline pilots, all describing the same unbelievable sight: a flaming object, seemingly under some form of control, leaving a massive trail of smoke and debris in its wake. In the heavily populated Detroit-Windsor area, the object flew so low and so fast that powerful sonic booms rattled buildings to their foundations and shook the ground, causing widespread panic. Newspapers the very next day were filled with frantic headlines and eyewitness accounts. In Michigan, terrified residents reported seeing flaming chunks of what looked like metal falling from the sky, some of which were rumored to have started small grass fires where they landed. A pilot flying near Cleveland gave a specific report, stating he saw a large piece of the object break off and fall directly into Lake Erie. For a few terrifying minutes, it seemed to the people below that the sky itself was falling apart. But this was just the prelude. While scientists and astronomers would later conclude that the fireball was most likely a meteor that burned up and ended its journey over western Lake Erie, the most dramatic part of the story was only just beginning. Many miles away, in the quiet woods of western Pennsylvania, as the fireball streaked southeast, its trajectory carried it directly over the small, rural village of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. A quiet town of only about 200 people, located just 30 miles from the bustling city of Pittsburgh. But what the residents of Kecksburg saw was not a meteor burning out high in the atmosphere. They saw something else entirely. Something that defied easy explanation. Eyewitnesses on the ground, whose view was unobstructed by city lights, reported that the object, now trailing wisps of an unusual blue smoke, appeared to dramatically slow its descent. It then performed what many described as a controlled turn, as if an intelligence was guiding it away from the main part of the town and steering it toward a specific, isolated wooded ravine. Then, with a loud, muffled thump that vibrated through the soil, it disappeared into the tree. A young boy playing outside saw it go down, and his mother, Frances Kalp, immediately called the local radio station, WHJB, to report what they logically assumed was a plane crash. Soon after that fateful call, the Kecksburg Volunteer Fire Department was dispatched to search for a possible downed aircraft. Fire Chief James Ramasco, a man who knew these woods better than anyone, gathered his men and headed into the search area. What they found there, however, was not the scattered wreckage of an airplane. Semi-buried in the soft earth at the bottom of the ravine was a solid, metallic, and utterly alien object. Eyewitnesses who got close enough to see it before being forced away by authorities consistently described it the same way. It was about 10 to 12 feet long, shaped like a giant acorn, and appeared to be cast from a single piece of seamless, bronze-colored metal with no rivets, bolts, or weld marks of any kind. Most disturbingly, around the base of the object there was a band of strange markings that looked to the bewildered witnesses like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. There was no sign of a violent impact, no crater, no broken trees in a straight line, just this bizarre object nestled in the ground, as if it had gently landed there. The arrival of the United States military was unnervingly, almost impossibly fast. Within an hour of the object settling into the woods, the first official-looking cars began descending on Kecksburg. State police were the first on the scene, and they quickly established a perimeter, using their vehicles to block the rural roads leading to the crash site. But they were almost immediately superseded by a much higher and far more intimidating authority. Trucks and jeeps filled with armed personnel from the United States Army and Air Force swarmed into the tiny town, establishing a full-scale military cordon. The atmosphere changed instantly, from one of local emergency to one of serious national-level secrecy. The Kecksburg Volunteer Fire Station was unceremoniously commandeered and turned into a temporary military command post. Local firefighters, including Chief Ramasco, the very men who had been the first to find the object, were now treated like civilians and ordered to leave the area immediately. They were told their services were no longer needed and to speak to no one. Reporters from Pittsburgh and beyond who had rushed to the scene were stopped cold at the military roadblocks and turned away with no explanation. Residents who lived near the woods were sternly told to stay inside their homes, lock their doors, and not come out. Several credible witnesses, including a local reporter named John Murphy, reported seeing men in dark civilian suits who seemed to be directing the uniformed soldiers, giving orders and controlling the entire operation with an air of absolute authority. A 10-year-old boy named John Hayes, whose family farmhouse was being used as a vantage point by the military, watched from his window as a large, unmarked flatbed truck was driven down the narrow path into the woods, empty. A short time later, he saw it emerge from the darkness, now carrying a large object, completely obscured by a heavy tarp. By 8:00 p.m. that evening, just a few hours after it had arrived, the mysterious object was gone, and so was the military. The lockdown was over as quickly as it had begun, leaving behind a town full of confused and frightened people, and a story that was just beginning. The object that the first responders and local residents saw in the woods was the central, undeniable contradiction to the official story that would soon emerge. This was not a collection of porous, blackened meteorite fragments scattered across a wide area, as one would expect from an exploding bolide. Instead, witnesses described a single, solid object that appeared to be almost entirely intact. The consistency of their descriptions, gathered over decades from people who were there, is remarkable. The shape was the most distinct feature. Everyone who saw it used the same comparison. It looked like a giant acorn. It was estimated to be between 10 and 12 feet long and about 6 feet in diameter at its widest point. It was large enough that a man could not wrap his arms around it. The object was a dull, bronze or coppery color, and its surface was unnervingly smooth. Witnesses who got close said it appeared to be made from a single, seamless piece of metal. There were no rivets, no bolts, no weld marks, no panels, nothing to indicate how it had been constructed. It looked as if it had been poured into a mold. Perhaps the most tantalizing and mysterious detail was the band of markings around the base of the acorn. Several witnesses, including the first firefighters on the scene, described seeing what looked like writing, but it wasn't any language they recognized. They compared the symbols to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics or some form of strange calligraphy. The symbols were not painted on, but appeared to be etched or molded into the very structure of the craft. When the military arrived, their first priority seemed to be examining and photographing this specific feature before ordering everyone away. What they pulled from those woods was not a rock. It was a machine. The question was, whose machine was it? The official explanation for the events of December 9, 1965 was issued with incredible speed, almost as if it were prepared in advance. Even as military personnel were still securing the crash site in Kecksburg, the official narrative was already being disseminated to the press. That very evening, the United States Army issued a statement declaring that their search had found absolutely nothing. They claimed that the only thing that had fallen from the sky was a meteor, and that any reports of a recovered object were false. The Air Force quickly followed suit. Their official statement, released to the public, concluded that the spectacular fireball was a meteor that had likely burned up completely before ever reaching the ground. They dismissed the eyewitness accounts in Kecksburg as being the result of public excitement and misidentification. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official program for studying unidentified flying objects, listed the Kecksburg incident as explained, with the simple designation astronomical. They clung to the initial assessment from astronomers that the fireball's trajectory ended over Lake Erie, conveniently ignoring the dozens of witnesses who saw it change course and come down over Pennsylvania. This official story, however, was riddled with inconsistencies. If it was just a meteor that burned up, why was there a need for such a massive and secretive military operation? Why were armed soldiers deployed to quarantine a small town? Why were local firefighters and police, the very people who had found the object, forcibly removed from the scene? And why, if they found absolutely nothing, did multiple witnesses see the military haul a large tarp-covered object away on a flatbed truck? The official explanation didn't answer the questions, it only created more. It was a clear and deliberate attempt to shut the story down. But for the people who were there, the cover-up was more convincing than the explanation itself. For decades, the Kecksburg incident remained a frustratingly persistent piece of local folklore, a story told by old-timers with no official validation. That all changed in the early 2000s thanks to the tireless work of investigative reporter Leslie Keene. Believing that a government agency must have records of such a significant event, Keene filed a series of Freedom of Information Act requests aimed at NASA. She reasoned that if a sophisticated object re-entered the atmosphere, NASA, the nation's space agency, would have been involved in its analysis. Initially, NASA claimed it had conducted a thorough search and found no relevant documents. But Keene and her team persisted, uncovering evidence that 2 NASA employees had, in fact, been dispatched to examine the fragments from the crash in 1965. Armed with this new information, Keene filed another, more specific request. This time, NASA's story changed. They admitted they had once possessed the files, but now, decades later, the records had gone missing. They claimed the relevant boxes of documents from that time period had been lost. Unsatisfied with this explanation, Keene's organization, the Coalition for Freedom of Information, filed a lawsuit against NASA in 2007 to force the release of the missing files. The lawsuit was a landmark moment in the history of the case. During the legal proceedings, a NASA official admitted under oath that the agency had failed to properly search for the records. The federal court judge overseeing the case called NASA's handling of the requests a ball of bureaucratic red tape and ordered them to conduct a more thorough search. Despite the judge's order, NASA ultimately produced only a handful of low-level, previously seen documents, maintaining that the crucial files, the original analysis of the object recovered from the woods, were lost forever. The lawsuit proved one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt. There were files. There was an investigation, and someone, at some point, had made sure they would never see the light of day. So what fell in the woods of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, on that cold December night? The official explanation of a simple meteor simply does not hold up to scrutiny. The controlled descent, the physical description of the recovered object, the massive and secretive military response, and the later admission of missing NASA files all point to something far more significant. Over the years, 2 primary alternative theories have emerged. The first and most mainstream scientific theory is that the object was a piece of a failed Soviet satellite. Specifically, some researchers point to Cosmos 96, a Soviet probe intended for Venus that malfunctioned and was predicted to re-enter Earth's atmosphere on the very same day. This theory is compelling because it accounts for a man-made object re-entering the atmosphere at the right time. However, it has significant problems. Official tracking data placed Cosmos 96's re-entry path thousands of miles away, over Canada. Furthermore, the known design of the Soviet probe does not match the seamless acorn-shaped object with hieroglyphic-like markings described by the witnesses in Kecksburg. This leaves us with the second, more unsettling possibility, that the object was something else entirely. Was it a secret experimental American craft? Perhaps a re-entry vehicle or drone that went off course? This would certainly explain the swift and total military clampdown. Or, as many of the witnesses have come to believe, was it something not of this earth? We may never know for sure. The only certainty is that the truth of what happened in Kecksburg was deemed so important that the United States government went to extraordinary lengths to conceal it, creating a mystery that has now endured for more than half a century. The acorn in the woods remains one of the most profound and unanswered questions in American history, and that is it. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the Purple Files, click the like button, and drop a comment down below. More videos to come, and until then, thanks for watching.